our job was to tell them that everything is good. Then we will lose our jobs and we would never get them back. Approximately 2 months after the explosion, I spent a total of about 30 days examining patients who live in the most contaminated areas. We were told very strictly not to tell the population that anything is wrong.
Sand, boron, clay and lead were dropped onto the flames. The Soviets then tried clearing debris with remote-controlled robots. But when the machine started breaking down in the toxic atmosphere, groups of men were brought in to clear 100 tons of radioactive material from the area.
Workers in Chernobyl had 90 seconds to do their job at a time, but at what cost to their lives? And what jobs were oh so important that it was worth the sacrifice? The term liquidator is a broad term used to describe those who worked in the overall cleanup and response to the disaster. Firefighters, construction workers, soldiers, helicopter pilots, miners, animal control squads, so forth and so on are all technically liquidators. Because of this, sources say that there are about 300,000 liquidators out there, but some folks claim this number could be as high as 800,000. Once again, yes, it is a very broad term, and pinpointing who exactly was a liquidator is tough. So because of that, it becomes difficult to find out information about those guys who went on the roofs, who threw radioactively potent materials back into the core, because, well, they don't really have an official name. Oftentimes they were just referred to as roof liquidators, cleanup workers, or just construction workers. 90 seconds though, I want to focus on that. They had 90 seconds to clear the roof of whatever radioactive lead and other debris they could find.
He was working at the Chernobyl power plant when one of the world's worst nuclear accidents unfolded.
There has been a nuclear accident in the Soviet Union, and the Soviets have admitted that it happened.
The Soviets are saying little, but what is known is cause for concern: a nuclear accident.
Some folks were shown images, were ordered to pick out specific pieces of debris, but others not so much. Even with this very short time limit, their lives were most likely forever affected, whether it be leukemia or cancer or just a shortened lifespan. Going up on that roof definitely did something to their bodies. When he left his wife and offspring on May 7th of 1986 and went to work, John Cornell didn't know he was going to be one of those people. John and about 200 other men were taken to a nearby school, and once they'd walked through the door, they were not allowed to leave. The men's passports were completely seized before they were loaded onto buses and taken to a forest, where they were told to slip into brand new army uniforms. When the officials finally revealed that they were heading to Chernobyl, the men were almost relieved, because they didn't know much about what had happened. They were happy to not be fighting in a war, and they were led to believe that the radiation levels were practically safe. Jan says that it wasn't uncommon for Soviet authorities to use propaganda and routinely cover up events of public interest, and he believes that not even those in charge immediately knew that they were dealing with the planet's biggest nuclear catastrophe. Jan was, by the way, amongst the first group sent to clean up in the aftermath of everything. Tasked with hosing down radiation on the houses and villages, he was thrown right into the thick of it. These folks mixed water with a washing powder-like substance and measured the radiation levels once the houses had been hosed down. And at the time, these results were so good that he thought, hey, maybe we can really finish up in 2 weeks. But then one time, somebody had an idea that maybe they should return to a village that was hosed down a couple of days earlier and check the levels again. They were shocked to find that the radiation had not only returned, but it got worse. Despite the apparent uselessness of the job, these folks continued to work 11-hour days without a day off. After that, they would have like 2 days of downtime a month. And as weeks rolled on and months rolled on, suspicions grew. And it got to the point where whatever enthusiasm the men initially felt had faded. Concerns grew about whether they were being lied to about the radiation being harmless, and the respirators that these men were given wouldn't stay on because of the heat, and they were used until they got holes in them. Later they found out these things should have been replaced every day for safety. We will never know just how much radiation the many hundreds of thousands of liquidators were exposed to, because it kind of varied. Depending on your specific role and area you worked in, that would kind of influence how much you got exposed to. Only about 2 to 3% of these liquidators actually had like meters that they could measure things with, and even that was not reliable. Apparently it was like a 50-50 chance, which I don't know about you, but I don't want to stake my life on a 50-50 chance. For the roof workers specifically, we know that their lives and bodies were altered in some way, shape, shape, or form no matter what. And they had to continue working on other construction or cleanup tasks near wherever they were. So even though they were doing this and that and everything else, they were still being hammered with radiation. Even before going up onto rooftops, these liquidators were talking about experiencing coughs. And despite their growing fears, they were reluctant to confide in each other. And then, a shimmer of hope. There was a rumor that the very last leg of the assignment was just to go up onto the roof, clear off as much debris as possible, and you could go home. Humans were being given a task that remote control robots had previously attempted but failed. Why? Oh, just no big. The machines had simply stopped working because of the unprecedented levels of radiation. So when Jan said, oh, and they told us you have to go on the roof, they were like, oh, okay, cool, we can go home. So on the day, they changed their army uniforms for a protective suit, glasses and a gas mask, a metal guard. All the men were lined up and told, who doesn't want to go up on the roof? But only a couple of folks said no. They realized it had to be done. They couldn't just leave this. A lot of folks realized the longer this reactor is open, the more dangerous it is. So remember that 90 seconds, folks? This is where it comes back into play. Jan was one of the folks shown on a small screen exactly which pieces of debris he was supposed to pick up with a shovel and throw off, but he was strictly warned against going too close to the edge, and he had just a short period of time to complete the assignment, and then a bell would ring to tell him when to book it back. This time frame was meant to limit exposure to radiation because, as we knew it by this point, it could end your life, but the men weren't being told this. They compared it to being in the army, where nobody explains anything. You get an order, you go, and you do it. It's a demand. And Jan said he'll never forget those 2 minutes standing over the edge of an open nuclear reactor, shoveling radioactive graphite. Maybe it was the adrenaline, maybe it was the fear. Something made him go blank. Because according to him, once he got on the roof, it looked completely different from what was being shown on the screen. So he just grabbed whatever pieces of debris he could. And when he got there, that adrenaline was pumping so hard that he thought he would turn the roof upside down. He didn't even think about what was going to happen to him. He didn't have time to think. It was survival instinct. Pure and simple. Emergency workers also helped to clean up the plant premises and surrounding area. These other workers were mostly plant employees, firefighters, soldiers, miners from all over the Soviet Union. Like I said, the Russian registries list approximately 400,000 liquidators as of 1991, but 600 people were granted the status of liquidator. What's the big deal about the status? These 600,000 individuals received special benefits because of their involvement. So special health care for risking your life. Some folks worked on decontamination, some folks worked on construction, some folks worked on the establishment of settlements and towns for other workers and evacuees. They also built waste areas, dams, water filtration systems, and this is where things get important, the sarcophagus, the thing that entombs the entire fourth reactor to contain the remaining radioactive material. The sarcophagus was not a structure meant to last. This was something built out of pure desperation and panic. In an attempt to contain as much of the radioactive materials as possible, workers were very quickly building this large structure. Often, and by often I mean most of the time, without necessary protective gear. They were rushing to fill in open spaces with thousands of cubic meters of concrete. There were helicopters dropping things directly into the reactor. There was miners everywhere digging to try and avoid runoff from melting through the foundation of the base and into the ground. The entire section of the facility was covered by massive concrete walls, and that's how it got its name, the sarcophagus, because it looked kind of ominous. In the end, the structure was able to prevent hundreds of tons of radioactive contaminants from getting out. But, on the other side of the scale, 31 people died of radiation poisoning during or after it was all done. I think construction only took about 5 months. But once again, this was not built to last. The building lacked any kind of bolted joints. There was openings in the roof that have allowed water to seep in and corrode the structure. Thankfully, there has been work to fix that. Work on the new safe confinement at the site started in late 2010 and was moved into position in November of 2016. This was done to prevent the release of the contaminated material from the old shelter, and at the same time, protects the shelter from all the external sort of impacts, like weather. The new structure is an extraordinary landmark. It's wild, and thankfully, this time some care was taken to minimize the risk of workers' exposure to radiation. It was assembled in 2 halves, and these were joined and slid into position. And that's all for today, folks. I've been Alexa, your resident ookie spooky girly. Let us know what you think of this new stuff, and we'll see you next time.